Hello, librarians. This is Chris Connolly with the HarperCollins Library Marketing Team. Thank you so much for joining us today for this special door-to-door episode with author Maryanne O'Hara, whose memoir, Little Matches, goes on sale a month from now, April 20th. This is a memoir detailing Maryanne's loss of her adult child, Caitlin, an incredible woman, and also how she came out the other side. I'm joined today by Lainey Mays. Hello, Lainey. And of course,
Hello.
Maryanne. Maryanne,
Hi.
thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is my first live event, so thanks. And with
Absolutely.
librarians. I love
You're
librarians.
amongst your
Who
people.
doesn't? Exactly.
So just a quick background on you, Maryanne. You wrote and published short stories before researching and writing Cascade, a novel that explores what lasts. Shortly after Cascade's publication, your daughter Caitlin's lifelong health condition worsened, requiring the family to uproot from Boston to Pittsburgh for more than 2 years to wait for a lung transplant. And this memoir, Little Matches, is going to be published on April 20th from Harper One. So again, thank you so much for being here today. And I do want to read just a few quick quotes. There's been some incredible reviews, quotes from authors, publications across the US. Danny Shapiro's quote, she wrote Inheritance and Hourglass, I thought was powerful. She says, this luminous and harrowing memoir is a tale of a mother's devotion and grief, yes, but when I closed Little Matches, tears standing still in my eyes, I was left with a sense that I had met not one but two remarkable spirits, my world enlarged. And then Meg Wolitzer, who you viewers know from, she's the author of The Female Persuasion and The Interestings. Little Matches is gripping and true in all ways, and I am so glad to have spent time in the company of Maryanne and Caitlin. This is a fine, affecting memoir that will stay with me for a very long time. And I think that is very, very true. So once more, thank you for joining us, for bringing us this memoir, Caitlin's story. And if you don't mind, Maryanne, could you tell us a little bit more about the book, the story, and why you're bringing it to readers?
I really felt compelled to bring it. I never, ever wanted to write the personal. I'm a fiction writer. I like the imagination. I like researching and making things up. But after Caitlin's passing, the only thing that helped was writing. And the only kind of writing that helped was writing on this blog that I had set up when she was waiting for her transplant. I felt like I was communicating with people, and I was getting wonderful messages from strangers who really encouraged me to tell the story. And should I show my little video? I think I'd like to show the video. This is a video that my brother, who is an artist, and I created. It's only 2 minutes, but I think it will give you a good sense of the journey that Little Matches will take you on, and also the tone of the book. And I am going to share it so that I can practice. Here we go. After I lost my daughter, Caitlin, I looked for revelation. I became every human who has ever looked for answers to the hard questions. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does consciousness survive death? Does my existence serve any real purpose? Does anyone's? So I wrote Little Matches from inside real-time grief, and I asked those big life questions. Caitlin became a real sage for all of us. She had so much wisdom. And the last couple of years, while she was waiting for her lung transplant and she was on oxygen, it was easier to write than to speak. After her passing, many of her friends shared her writing with me, including text messages, conversations that would have been lost forever were recorded. So all of her old soul wisdom is in the book in a really cool way. I know I'm not the first person to lose what's most important to me. Humans lose all the time, and lose hard. Little Matches is for anyone who loses and asks, now what?
Okay. I'm so lucky to have a wonderful brother who's so talented. We very deliberately moved the video from inside, where it's more serious and dark, to outdoors where there's light and nature and birds and an eternal universe. And I want people to go into the book knowing that it's about all kinds of things. And it's basically about life and how wonderful it is. I truly believe that grief seeks relief. It always seeks light. And one thing I say in the book that I truly believe is that grief and joy can coexist forever, because they're both points on the spectrum that is love. So the big arc is me asking questions. Is there meaning? Is there consciousness after death? That's a question I never really thought I would explore and study, but I did. And there's a lot of interesting information out there. And that's in the book, and Caitlin's in the book. Her wisdom is just incredible, and I'm so eager to share her with people who don't know her.
Caitlin's voice, and you do share, Caitlin, her entries, her musings, her insights, her wisdom. And you're right. I mean, her wisdom is an understatement. She really is wise beyond her years. And I think everyone is better off for having known her through this book. Could you talk about at the point in this process at which you turned towards writing? And you're a writer by trade. This is something you've always done. What was it like turning inward, and at what point did you decide that this is what I needed to do?
I write in the book that about exactly 9 months after her successful lung transplant, my husband and I it was our wedding anniversary, and we were walking around Walden Pond. And I just realized I was operating without any kind of rudder, and that if the book was going to help people, then I needed to write it, and I wanted to write it. Caitlin wasn't able to author her own legacy, and it felt important for me to kind of do that for her. So in the beginning, I even wrote like working title by Maryanne and Caitlin O'Hara. I kept her very close. And writing it was really hard. It was different. I think nonfiction is a little bit easier to write, I've always found, because you know what happened. You don't have to make anything up. You just can sort of put the pieces together in the way that tells the story best. But I had so much material. And if I took this camera up my stairs and around the hallway and up into the attic, and showed you where all the piles of papers were for a couple of months. And exactly 3 years ago today, I was at a writing workshop, and I had 25 pages of it finally written. And when I came home, I thought, well, I think I can do it. I'm going to set my timer every day and write. That's what I do when I write. I just I force myself. No excuses. And I wrote it. I had a deadline, and I met the deadline, and that always feels really good. So
I love hearing from Caitlin too throughout the book, and you say in the book it's our book, where we wrote it, together, and all of her writing, some for the blog, some that you found, some from people who sent things in. And I personally really enjoyed seeing her thoughts on religion and faith, and what kind of things did you guys talk about and seek out in that way? And then were you surprised if of anything that you maybe received later on to put in the book?
for sure, we both didn't really quite know what to think of Afterlife. I started out being very, very agnostic when I was younger. And I raised her with some weak religion, mainly for social reasons. I wanted her to be aware of what was out there, but I never really fully agreed with any particular religion. And then she got interested in sort of paranormal stuff when she was a teenager, like a lot of kids do. But some really unusual things happened. She had this one soul reading that I write about in the book when she was about 19. And this woman read her anonymously from a distance. And it just made everything stand up on my neck. And there just seemed to, there just seemed to be more to it. And then after her passing, I was so desperate to believe in an afterlife that I was really hard on myself and extremely skeptical. But as I write in the book, a lot of synchronicities happen, so many that to discount them really does start to seem myopic. I mean, they're just, you can't make a lot of this stuff up. You just can't. And the other thing that really struck me, I felt an obligation to talk about this stuff because I did it without any declarations, and I had done some of it in my blog. And I just basically said, here's what happened. I'm not explaining it. I'm not attempting to make anyone believe anything, but here's what happened. And so many people, so many like seemingly really practical people came to me with stories of their own. And that's when, you know, at one point, certain people were telling me, well, you know, it should probably be a grief book. Do you really want to write about signs and synchronicities and all that? And then I said, no, I think I need to tell exactly what happened because it's part of the whole story and it's part of the reason I've come out the other side. And I'm reading a really good book right now that just came out by a doctor who was a professor for years at the UVA Medical School, psychiatrist who studied near-death experiences all of his life, but researched them from a really scientific point of view. And he says very tellingly that when he was a young doctor, he had to really feign more skepticism than he really felt because he was terrified of losing his career. The name of the book is called After. It's really good.
Yeah.
Just came out.
And I'm just thinking of the section where you talk about past lives and Caitlin's relationship to music. And if you don't mind introducing viewers to maybe just some of the concept behind that and why it's in the book.
Yeah, well, it's kind of convoluted because that was part of that soul reading where this woman from afar had told Caitlin that Caitlin, for years, she had these horrible nightmares, and they were Nazi nightmares, and she would dream that like Nazi was like on her phone, and she had these terrifying nightmares, and she was afraid it meant that she had been a Nazi. And this woman was telling her that she had been a child prodigy musician in Czechoslovakia and I'm getting such chills, and had been killed at age 11. And she said to Caitlin, did anything happen to you at age 11? And Caitlin came very close to death at age 11. She had part of her lung removed. She was very, very sick. She spent months in the hospital. And this woman said, well, oftentimes a soul will reenact a trauma at the same age. And Caitlin had this lifelong love of music. She took flute lessons when she was little. She could read music without even ever really learning, but she always avoided playing music. She listened but she never really, she had this complicated relationship with music. And so this soul reading sort of seemed to make sense of it. And it was just, as I write about it in the book, it's kind of wild because it's convoluted because as she's telling me the story, I had just published a short story in the North American Review that I thought I had made up from nothing about a child prodigy cellist. And there were a lot of similarities. It was really pretty wild. I think I tell the story better in the book, so read the book.
But it is like, I got chills, and not in like it's not like in a, I guess you could say spooky, but it's more just like the enormity of what life is and what a person's life can be, and to really fathom that is incredible. And I do just want to take a moment to acknowledge viewers of, we have a viewer who, our friend Catherine Phoenix in Boulder, and I know the amount of suffering happening there. We want to acknowledge it. We hear you and we see you, and our hearts go out to you. And yeah, grief is the starting point for a lot of what we discover in this book. I love this section, this just a sentence in the book. Let people know that none of us is alone with our broken bits. And that really struck me. And I do think there's so much in this part memoir, part spiritual journey. There's so much for everyone. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that and thank you again for the book, and thank Caitlin for this book. Lainey, did you have a question? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, sorry, my screen froze. So come 1 second. You guys can see me okay? Okay. No, I was just wanting to go back to, in the book, I love that you talked about like grief not being linear, and there's a lot of things to learn and process. And I think we wanted to stress just how much it is a memoir of this morning, but also there's sound, comforting advice on how to survive loss and how to come, I don't want to say come to terms, but to move and navigate that. And I think in a time where everybody knows about that, everybody's seeing that every day. I don't know if you want to talk about maybe like how long after you wrote the book and what was that process of coming in terms of writing this book and what you were going to put in it.
It's kind of hard to say that I decided to put anything in it. It really felt very organic as I wrote it. In many ways, it felt almost downloaded. And sometimes the best writing does happen that way. It just came through. And the timeline of grief is not linear. Anyone who's suffered great loss will tell you that. And I do want people to get from this book, and to know, if they don't know already, that so much that we humans live with, suffer with, is invisible. Caitlin had an invisible illness. She looked normal and beautiful, but she had, for most of her adult life, 30% lung capacity. But other people suffer with invisible stuff all the time. We all do. And I think that grief too is something that we live with as humans. Everything is temporary. We are temporary. And just the fact of temporary brings grief. You're sad at the end when something's over. You're sad to see your kids grow up. So I think that grief is something we all live with, and it's okay to talk about it. Fortunately, I have really wonderful people in my life, and I feel really free to mourn Caitlin and talk about her and laugh about her. And we laugh and cry at the same time. And I want to reach out to people who don't have that and say that it is okay. No one is alone with the broken bits. It's really true. That's why I've cherished the strangers who write to me, and part of the dedication of the book is to the strangers.
And I want to take a moment, and it is amazing, for those of you who have not read this book yet, the people that came into your life, into Caitlin's life, and following her passing even as well. And just, again, I don't want to call them coincidences, because I think that doesn't do justice to just what the power, I think, of Caitlin, and it's something I think we all possess, but she was incredible and is incredible. I want to just read a quick note from Casey Davis. She's a librarian friend of ours. I lost my dad November 2019 and my dog Bella October 2020. And at times the grief has been all consuming. I sometimes find myself afraid to be happy again. How did you move towards happiness? And thank you, Casey, for sharing.
I think, Casey, I'm so sorry. And I think the fact that you're sharing, I hope, helps a little bit, because talking about Caitlin, as I just said, makes it better. And looking at pictures of her and singing the silly songs that we used to sing to our dog who died 3 years ago, a year after Caitlin, and I miss that little pup all the time. And I still cry. Yesterday, I had a sob fest. And I'm sure if you saw me, as you guys did, like an hour later, I look normal and fine. I guess I just want to tell people it's okay. We all live this arc of a lifetime, and there's a lot that's hard in it, and there's a lot of joy. So I think when you find joy, you have to seize it, and definitely keep those people and those pups in your life, because they're not really gone. They're still here. They're still here.
I love that so much. And you have a few, I don't want to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that Caitlin, you know, a lot of people, a lot of kids who are sick from the get-go are like Caitlin. They know what's important. And just like a lot of people don't really get it until the ends of their lives. And there's a little part that I like to read. And I decided I'm going to use this as a little tool when I do book talks. This was a little rubber ball that I put in Caitlin's Christmas stocking the first year of transplant waiting, which went 2.5 years, by the way. And I told her that the world will be yours, you know, hold tight, it's going to happen. And Caitlin sent this to her boyfriend in 2016, and he shared it with me after her passing. When I picture us now in 2016, I pull back. I always pull back and picture myself in time and in space geographically. It makes me removed enough to ultimately feel that there is not much I can do to change the shifts of the world, but also inspired enough to think, what is my role in this lifetime? I am fascinated by this kind of thing, by the ebbs and flows of history, by patterns and by people. I guess it's harder for many people to think in that zoomed out way. For me, it was a mechanism I cultivated as a way to deal with being sick. I would zoom out, see my own smallness, realize it's all been done before and will be done again, and I could relax and enjoy my life now. Caitlin was very much a living in the moment person. It was really hard to make plans with her. And sometimes that was frustrating, but it was also because half the time you'd make a plan and you'd have to cancel it. We love to travel, and for every trip we planned, every 2, we would always have to cancel one, often at the last minute. It was heartbreaking. So she was really good at living in the moment. We all should be. I try hard.
And so I did want to ask about, so for the comfort in all of this, and I would, if we could talk a little bit more about faith or religion, and for those of people who are skeptical about the afterlife, is there a way to approach this? I mean, do you have advice for those who are skeptical and still, you know, feeling that pain?
Yeah, I think that there are people out there who are, you know, psychics and mediums, people who have been really tested and are not frauds or whatever. But I think that unless you have that own knowing yourself, you can never fully believe anything 100%. So you do have to sort of take some things on faith, and you sort of add up the evidence. What I didn't know is that there actually has been so much science, like this doctor in Virginia that I was just talking about. There is a lot of science out there, and we just don't know about it. It's not in the culture. And a lot of what is in the culture is a lot of hooey, really, you know, and silly stuff. But if you start in, like, there was a time when people really believed this was flat, and it wasn't that long ago. And you can see why they believed it, because it made sense that it was flat. How could it be this round thing floating in space? But so my feeling is that all our life is so magical. The fact that we even exist, that everything, our wonderful planet that keeps safe, it's all so magical anyway that I don't think it's that much of a stretch to believe that there's at least one level higher than this life on Earth. Like, why is that such a big stretch, really? Consciousness is fascinating.
Yeah.
And science calls it the hard question. They have no answers. None. It's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I have a list of books and things in the back of the book for, you know, things I consulted when I was writing the book and asking all my questions. And And I don't make any big declarations. I like people to think for themselves and decide for themselves, but I do tell them what happened.
And and that's an interesting topic, the reading list, because it's an expansive list. Did you, I mean, were you surprised through your research, kind of, you know, were you, of course, I guess you can't really avoid it, but were your eyes opened on particular aspects? I mean, you have this great perspective. What did these books do for you that maybe you didn't expect them to do?
Well, they opened my eyes. One of the big things that happened in the beginning was really saying, okay, I'm going to read the science, and the scientists are going to prove to me that consciousness can in no way survive the bodily life. And that didn't happen. And also, even just more than that strict question, right now we are humans living a life on Earth, and that is what's important right now. I think it's a really good idea to have a sense that there might be more, and that there might be a purpose why we're here, so that you live this life better. But isn't the whole point of right now to really live a good life, a meaningful life, a life with purpose, a life that really, you know, one of the lines, something Caitlin said to me early on, and she didn't say it in a pious way at all, but I was stressing about something in Pittsburgh when she was waiting for a transplant. She was like, "Oh, Mom, don't you get it? The only thing that matters is loving people and being kind." And you hear that, and you know, it's really true. What really matters at the end of a life? Everyone, ask yourself that question. What really matters? And at one point I talk about this novel I was writing and how this woman who was an oral historian in it said to this guy who was kind of a lost soul, like, if suddenly every person on the planet disappeared, would you even want to live without people? Like, you could have everything you wanted, but without people. And Caitlin wrote in a Mother's Day post once, you know, for people who think that you can survive anything on your own if you really have to, I'm here to tell you, you can't. You need people. And I found that to be true. And there's Caitlin. Oh my God. So that is the last Mother's Day. And for a long time, I really couldn't look at that photograph because look at the light in her face. She always gave me peonies. They're my favorite flower. And she knew I loved black and white checks. And I used to call her Rapunzel. We were on the 15th floor in this building in Pittsburgh, and it was really hard for her to leave. It was a big struggle to leave on any kind of an outing, but somehow she managed to get that stuff that day and surprise me on Mother's Day.
What a gorgeous photo.
Yeah. Her friends
I-
send me peonies now. She's got wonderful friends.
It's wonderful. And I just want to say, I feel like Caitlin was a philosopher in her own right. You know, those the pieces in the book are just so transformative, and she's funny and has a lot of insight. And like you were saying, you just kind of like, what's the big question here? What's the big takeaway? People are gonna they're gonna love hearing from her in the book as well.
I think so. The parts that are written by her are wonderful because it was her best way of communicating with friends while she was waiting for her transplant. She couldn't really talk with the oxygen that well, and it was easy to write anyway. Everyone writes now, which is great because we have so much has been recorded that would have been lost forever, really. But yeah, recently I found her acceptance to the BU's master's program in philosophy, and she really wanted to do that back before she got sick. And then she was just like, it's not going to happen. And then once she was actually waiting for her transplant, she had really shifted yet again, and she had decided that she wanted to get a Master of Public Health and really try to affect public policy. So Lainey's frozen.
And just deep in thought. I think Caitlin, her sections are just so stunning and so beautiful, but also something that can't be understated is just the power of your relationship with her. I mean, with your husband as well, with her friends, she had this gravity pulling people towards her because she was incredible. But could you talk about, like, maybe for those who are worried about their relationships right now, how did you foster such an incredible relationship so early on?
That's a good question. You know, I'm the oldest of six, and I never really wanted children at all. I felt like I grew up with five children. And so it wasn't like I had this sort of daydreamy vision of what marriage and a family would be like. And we got married kind of unexpectedly. And then Caitlin came very unexpectedly. And then she was sick. And I just felt from the beginning, I was also very young, that I don't know, I wanted to just try and do it right. And I always noticed that, you know, if parents like pretended they never smoked and they never did pot, kids know better. And I never wanted to just like be her best friend either, but I just felt like if I treated her with respect and honesty, I'd get that in return. And I did. And I think it also really helps that we just kind of clicked. We were just in sync from the beginning. I mean, it's not like we were the same, very similar in many ways. She was very fiery. I mean, she's the kind of person who would yell at a cop, and if he was needed yelling at, and they often do. And she used to laugh at me for being too goody-goody, but maybe we balanced each other very well. And but you know, she also from the beginning, and I think a lot of parents, I only had one child, but so many people will say, you just never know. They're all different. And I think she was Caitlin from the beginning. I write in the book that she had this kindness inside of her from the very beginning that used to take me aback, and I loved it. You know, she was always like putting her little arm around some other friend who was upset, and hurt my heart. It was great. So, but definitely the respect. I think that's important.
Thank you for that.
I also have this other photo from Mother's Day. Do you want me to show that?
Sure. Yeah, that was the Mother's Day a year later. And this is kind of going back to that invisible illness, that invisible whatever people are suffering with. These are some of Caitlin's best friends, and that's a picture of Caitlin, obviously. And, you know, new babies, pregnant, painful in so many ways, obviously. And I look happy there, and I am, and yet I'm also dying inside. And I'm also so grateful that they're all surrounding me on Mother's Day and taking good care. Caitlin, it's interesting, and a lot of Caitlin's friends said this, but her close friends all would say Caitlin was my best friend. And she really was to a lot of people. So she had a really hard time calling anyone her best friend because she loved them so much, but had super special relationships with a good handful of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much we can all learn from Caitlin, and how to carry ourselves and how to live and how to foster relationships. I think truly just incredible. Could we talk a little bit about the title Little Matches and where that comes from? And I also loved the little note in the book about where the photo of Caitlin came from that's featured on the cover.
Yeah, well, the title comes from Virginia Woolf, To the Lighthouse, which is a book that I love and Caitlin loved. And it's the line in the book toward the end. I should memorize it. The great revelation perhaps never did come. Instead, there were little daily miracles, illuminations, matches struck in the dark. I think that's it. And I've always loved that line so much. And I was using, whenever I write, I need to have sort of a framing device. So I was using for each chapter, like little framing devices, like epigraphs. And Little Matches was one of them for one of the chapters. And for a long time, the working title was Speak to Me and Joni, Joni Mitchell. Caitlin loved her. And then suddenly Little Matches just seemed like the right title. It just sort of grew organically out of Virginia Woolf, which is a wonderful thing.
And I do, so, and this kind of brings me to my next question, which is being an end of life doula, which is something you do now, which I think probably many watching are unfamiliar with. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, so I'm a certified end of life doula. It's not my job, and I'm not even actually doing any kind of volunteering yet because of COVID. But I've been a lifelong volunteer. I just have always found it really great to get out and help people. And for a long time, I did Reiki at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, where basically you just go in and give people 20 minutes of comfort. And there was a really great reaction to that program. And I didn't want to go back there after Caitlin's passing. Caitlin spent a lot of time at the Brigham, and I don't really want to go back there, but I've always wanted to do hospice volunteering. And a few years ago, I really felt ready for it. So last year I did this end of life doula certification that the UVM's medical school offers. It's a great program. So an end of life doula is like a birth doula, only at the other end. And the fact that you don't even really know what it is a sign that, you know, we spend so much time preparing for birth, and rightfully so. It's a wonderful, joyous occasion. But the other end blindsides us, and it's really a sad state of affairs. So I had thought that I would take the doula course, number one, so I could better speak to the state of end of life culture in our country when I talked about this book, because by then I already knew that the book was coming out. And also so that I could then do my hospice training. And then COVID came. So I haven't actually done any of the doula work. However, one of the things that I loved about the doula training, my favorite part was doing legacy workshops or legacy interviews with people. So what I'm going to be doing is offering a few of these workshops through bookstores and maybe libraries. But right now we have 3 set up with 3 different bookstores around the country, and then communities can get involved. So whether that be groups in the community or libraries or whatever. And I will show people how to conduct a life interview with a loved one, or even with yourself. You can do it at any age, of course, no matter what your health status is. And I think they're really wonderful. I wrote an essay. It's actually going to be in Time magazine in the next couple of weeks about life interviews and how I really missed my opportunity with Caitlin and also with my mother, who passed this past year. And I had the opportunity to do an interview with my mother, and I thought, oh, you know, I'll have time. And oh, when we get to, you know, we'll have plenty of time. And then COVID came and she was in a care center and it never happened. So in my research for novel writing, I've used oral histories a lot, and I love them. They're wonderful, but oral histories are very different. They're, you know, you want all the detail of the everyday in an oral history, but a life interview is a little more focused, and there's some good questions you can ask, and there are ways of framing questions so you don't alarm people, especially if they are, you know, getting close to end of life. But they're wonderful. They are a great way to think about your life and your purpose and what kind of message you might like to leave behind. So I'm looking forward to doing those. Yeah. I'm going to be working on that, preparing the webinar in the next 2 weeks.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions in our Facebook group, and one might lead into that last photo that we have for you. So our friend Jennifer Winberry says, I'm a very ardent believer in synchronicity. Do you continue to find these instances in your life?
Oh my God, yes. Oh my goodness. It's insane. It's every day. It really is every day. And I can't even record them all. And yeah, this will probably lead into this. Okay, so don't show it until after I read it, okay? All right, so we had a life celebration of Caitlin's birthday the year after her passing, and out on Martha's Vineyard, where she loved the vineyard, and all of her friends came. And it was wonderful, but it was also horrible. So this is me in the book. I decide to drive out to the far end of the island, down Lobsterville Road, a skinny stretch of pavement that follows the curving peninsula of Lobsterville Beach, to reenact the last time we were on island, and Caitlin and I drove all the way out there. Even in the height of summer, it's a part of the island where you rarely see other people, just long, empty stretches of beach open only to residents. Houses are few. I decide to go all the way to the end, as I had with Caitlin that day, where the road ends at a small turnaround and boat ramp. As I drive, I am saying things aloud. What the heck? Why does it have to be this way? Why can't we communicate if you're really out there? I try to remind myself of the medium and the hawks and speak to me and Joni, but I'm jammed inside Earth's physical plane. And today is one of those days when a tangible afterlife is fantasy. She's gone, I think. There's nothing else. I will never see her again. I loved you from the first minute, I say, and I am crying now. No one will ever call me mom again. I turn into the dead end area where the road stops at the water, and I pass him, a guy who was all by himself out there, carrying a burlap bag with 3 big red letters on its side, an acronym for something, 3 red letters that spell MOM. It was pretty wild. That made me cry even harder. It was just so wonderful. I couldn't believe it. But yes, those kinds of things happen all the time, and it's wonderful. And also being open to them is wonderful. One of the people who I can't believe read my book and who was somebody that's wonderful is Laura Lynn Jackson. And she's a medium who has some really fascinating books called The Light Between Us and Signs. And she's a certified, like a blind certified medium. And you can read about how they are blind certified, but it's very impressive. And she does a lot of work for family bereavement organizations. And her books are pretty incredible. And she says, ask for signs, you will get them, and also be open to them, because they come and you say, oh, it's just a coincidence. Oh, it's just a coincidence. But that bag was more than a coincidence. It was very nice.
Thank you for sharing that. Maybe time for just 1 or 2 more questions, if that's okay with you, Maryanne.
Of course, yes.
So our friend Barbara Janko, hi Barbara, heart goes to you. She says so many of the lost family via COVID, and we weren't able to be present in the last weeks of their lives. It was brutal. So she asked, I've been working hard to confront and somehow mitigate the loss. What do you suggest for this ever increasing universe of mourners?
That's a really good question. I think there's the fact that everyone is group mourning right now seems to be helping, because there's so much conversation and there are a lot of suggestions for people out there. I see articles all the time and everyone's acknowledging that people are in pain and people are grieving. And that sense of community certainly helps. I think that you really have to think for yourself and do what works for you. And again, that's that whole timeline of grief is not linear, that it's okay to grieve. It's okay to grieve. I'm sure I'll be grieving until the day I die. I hope I am. And I can also appreciate the life that I have. And I guess the biggest takeaway from me, the biggest prescription for me that I always find to be best is nature, to get outside, to look up and see stars at night. Remember that you're human. Remember that you're temporary. And energy to the loved ones, the suffering ones, and smell the grass, be with the trees. That stuff really helps. I think that we have become so disconnected from our natural life as humans that we forget that we're part of the whole planet. And when you get out there and put the phone away and forget about all this stuff and connect with nature, I think that helps. That's my best advice for people who are suffering. and being with people and finding the people who care and are kind. The people who don't get it, there's a Facebook group that I am part of with mothers who've lost children to CF, and I can't believe some of the things people will say to people. People who are not kind, give them the boot. They can learn in the next life. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but I'm certainly enjoying asking all the questions.
Thank you for that. And asking the questions. I think Barbara says you've encouraged her to reach out to a medium, and she's been trying to find a COVID grief group. So I guess taking the steps and asking the questions, that's, like you said.
Yeah, there must be so many COVID grief groups.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess just to end the episode, are there any other resources or advice or tips or anything you'd like to share as far as, what helped you with your journey that that we can share, pass along?
Well, interestingly, I mean, the mediums helped more than anything, but I also was very skeptical and wary of mediums. And I happened to be very fortunate in that the ones that I did become connected with were very rigorously tested. And there's a site called Forever Family Foundation. It's kind of a funny name, but it's a site that is set up to sort of prove the existence of the afterlife for grieving families. And they are one of the groups that has done the blind testing. And there are resources on that site. And also I have a blog, my blog that I wrote with Caitlin. It's called 9livesnotes.com. I had written a piece in September of 19, I think, and I talked about the science of mediumship and being wary of frauds, etc., and how to protect yourself. Because there are definitely frauds out there, no question, no question.
Thanks so much for that. And as we had mentioned during the episode, there is a list of additional reading resources which you used yourself. For those of you watching, we can share that with you for some additional guides and resources. So I think we got to all of the questions, Maryanne. Before we head off, is there anything else you want to say about the book, about Caitlin? Just anything at all?
Well, I'm just really excited. I finished this book late 2019, so you know how publishing is. It's exciting to get it out there. I felt nervous, once it was sort of in the can, then I felt like, all right, well, now it can live without me. So I'm really relieved and happy that it's going to be out there. A friend of mine from Pittsburgh, she teaches at Carnegie Mellon. She's going to teach it when she's talking, because writing the spiritual, she's going to have a class called Writing the Spiritual, and she wants to offer it in like some grief groups she volunteers with. So I guess I just really want this book to encourage people to really love deeply and to find joy. And I hope people go into it knowing that it's a book that is a hard read and an inspirational read. And Caitlin is worth reading about, for sure.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Yeah, it's a hard read, but like I said before, you laugh, you get to know her, you get to know your relationship, and it's really wonderful. And thank you for letting us into that.
Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful. When my novel came out, I did a lot of library events, and library people are great readers, right? Like,
yeah,
it's kind of nice that this is my first real time talking about the book. So thank you very much.
And just want to mention, we also had an interview with your editor, Nikki Maudlin, on our podcast last week. And I think it was last week, the weeks run together.
2 weeks ago, yes.
2 weeks ago. And it was really, really wonderful. So we'll share that link as well. And you can hear about you guys' editor-author relationship, which I thought was really, really interesting. And you guys talked about things I think about all the time, actually. It was fascinating.
That's great. Yeah, he's wonderful. My agent sensed that he would be the best person for the book. So he got it first, and fortunately he liked it. And he was great. It's great. Was great for the book.
Yeah, excellent. And it is. I'm so excited for everyone to read it. We're a month away from publication. Librarians, thank you for joining us. Maryanne, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And we'll see you around. But again, thank you all. And we'll see you all next week for another episode of Doing
Yeah,
It
thank
Well.
you so much. Really
Excellent.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Maryanne. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.